Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. I'm coming to you from my YouTube channel, and it's Friday morning. The rain has stopped. It's a little overcast and a little breezy, so I'm not quite sure what the day will bring our way. But regardless of that, we're going to try and make the most of it. I've got another book summary to go through today, an interesting one on cultural change. And the book is entitled The Insider's Guide to Cultural Change by an author named Siohban McHale. McHale, what a name, McHale. I remember as a kid watching McHale's Navy and couldn't get enough of it. Back in the good old days, back in the 60s. So, as you can understand, this book is all about cultural change from an organisational perspective. But of course, the lessons that we can pick up here can be used within any context, within the family context, within the community context, wherever there are people who come together. You can use the lessons which come from this book. What I'll do is I'll just get under cover because it's just starting to rain again. Just never stops raining. So I'll just do it from under cover here and see where we can go with this book summary today. So culture is an important thing in our lives. We all relate to culture, and there are different cultures throughout the world, and Australia is a multicultural society. So I guess from the outset, we are immersed in culture in many ways through our daily interactions. So just getting an understanding in terms of what the definition of culture is probably a good starting point. So the author is quite pragmatic when it comes to defining the term culture, and they say that culture is basically how things work around here. So in your family, in your work, in your community, in any organisation that you interact with, and we touch many organisations and many groups throughout our daily lives. But culture basically means how things operate, how things work within that environment. So the author goes a little bit further and says that culture is all about the patterns or the agreements, the silent agreements, the contractual agreements that determine how the business operates, how the team works together, and it basically emerges, and this is key, it emerges from the leaders and how the leaders behave day to day, and it basically filters top down, or should filter top down. I'm not saying that it does. I've worked in organisations where I was very, very close friends with the managing director. We went to uni together, we shared similar social circles. And I remember him telling me once that even he as the managing director was couldn't help in a particular situation because the politics within his organisation was so rife, was so intense, that even he couldn't change things. Even he couldn't overrule things because of the cultural impact and consequences that he would face from his team. You know, growing up, I always thought, and I always remember, given that my parents ran businesses, they were entrepreneurs, I always remember that the boss was the boss and the boss could call the shots. But as I got older and got wiser and saw outside of just a small sole tradership, you realise that when you're working in corporate Australia, where there is a lot of governance, a lot of rules, and a lot of people involved with running the organisation, and basically everybody is an employee of that particular organisation, you learn very, very quickly that the boss isn't necessarily the boss, and it's a system that works and interfaces and basically gets things done. And the boss may have an opinion, but in some dysfunctional organisations, that opinion doesn't carry much weight, which is most unfortunate. But it's the way things happen, and it's the way things work in corporate Australia. But I guess the important thing to understand is that within that system, there are ways of slowly but surely implementing changes. But the first point that I want to make is that change isn't important. I remember when I was working in in my early career, and I moved from IBM to OTC. I went from one of the greatest organisations and the most revered organisations that the world had experienced in the mid-80s to going to a government-based organisation. And I remember the cultural shock that I felt from going from a very, very progressive international American organisation to an insular Australian government instrumentality, and saying to myself, what the hell have I got myself into? I went from an organisation that was a leader in its field, but technologically advanced, to an organisation that was also a leader in its field, but instead of sending electronic mail, there were handwritten memos, handwritten memos that you had to write by hand and distribute via internal mail that got hand delivered. So you've gone from one extreme to another. But I guess it was also a great lesson for me, just seeing that different organisations operate differently, not only based on the people, but also the technology, the enabling technology that helps, I guess, leverage the skills of those in the organisation. And just observing the politics and the games that people play was a lesson in itself. But the author here talks about the importance of, regardless of what you do, where you are, it's important to be consistent in your approach, and culture requires consistency, the consistent application of rules, both written and unwritten, and the consistent application of behaviours and patterns. And this consistency is critical, because an organisation that doesn't have or doesn't express consistency can be quite dysfunctional, as I mentioned, and spell disaster. The other key message that I've learnt and gets pushed through with this book here is the importance of situational management and situational leadership. Now, even though we've got rules, both written and unwritten, there does need to be a leeway, an avenue where people can express and change what they're doing in order to improve the situation. And the big message is improvement. Change in some cases is critical and important. But what I learnt early in my career is that we don't change things that are not broken. We only change things in order to improve the current situation. And what happens is, and what I've experienced over many, many years, is that people come into a new job and they think that they're adding value by making immediate and widespread changes. But as we say, unless those changes bring dramatic improvement and are implementable and are easy to understand and easy to do, those changes for change's sake may not necessarily bring about improvement and basically bring disharmony and destroy a functional working team, which is a big problem in today's corporate world, because it's not about how good the team players are. And we see this in sport time and time again. You can bring the best players in the world together. It's about how that team operates, how they allow and function with their own autonomy, everybody knowing exactly what they're doing, what the other people are doing, and fit together, work together, collaborate, cooperate, rather than fighting each other and working against each other. So bear with me. So as we say, each team, each organisation has both the written and unwritten rules, which I guess need to be understood and abided by to a certain extent, but they need to filter down from the top, and they need to be reinforced through the behaviours of the people working in the organisation. And to understand that it's not about what you say, but it's more about what you do and how you do it. Because I've worked in many organisations where there are a lot of things said, but if it's not supported, if it's not reflected in the activities of the leadership within the organisation and the day-to-day operational activities, then it's all just words, and it leads to nothing good, I guess, is the big point that I want to make. So I'll just change hands because I don't have my selfie stick today, so I'm holding the camera, which makes it a little bit awkward. So what the author then goes on to say is that it's not about what you say, but about what you do. And it's not about individual behaviour that influences culture, but it's all about the repeated behaviours, the patterns of behaviour that are critical. And in order to consider changing a culture, you must first become a detective of pattern, being able to identify a particular pattern, raise awareness of that pattern, and then try and reverse it or swap it out with another alternative, an empowering alternative. So making a change within an organisation is extremely difficult, is what I've learnt over the years. And you've got gurus and doyens of industry like Warren Buffett, who said that it's very, very rare that you can turn an organisation around. Now, people seem to think that it's easy to turn an organisation around and make changes and improve things, but it's really, really difficult, because once a culture, once behaviours are entrenched, then they're really, really hard to leverage and swap out, and that's one of the biggest challenges that all leaders face when they're joining new teams or creating new teams or moving to new organisations. You can't just come in and tap your magic wand 2 or 3 times and expect change to happen and behaviour and culture to magically transform. It takes years to implement, and it takes years potentially to change, because unless the people running the organisation and working in the organisation see that change as an improvement, then they're not going to support it, and if anything, they're going to sabotage it with all their might. So the key message coming from this author is that we need to become detectives of patterns and to basically write it down, journal it. I remember working in an organisation, and this is just an example. I don't know how good the example is, but I'll just throw it out there. Every time it came to pay increases, I had a manager who would always come up with excuses. This year we didn't make enough money, so we can't give you CPI or better. Now you're going to have to do with a 1% increase. And another year, an organisation said during the GFC, I think it was, that in order to save people's jobs, we'll need to go without pay increases this year. Or another excuse was that we'll need to get people to take all their holidays or to take leave without pay in order to save people's jobs. But what happened is, we have a few bad years, but then we have some good years. And during those good years, the excuses continue. Oh, we can't give you a better pay increase because the industry's got competitive issues with other organisations who are undercutting us, and we need to be more competitive. And it seemed to be a pattern which existed every year. So it got to the point where, quite sadly and quite unfortunately, I'd been working there for 5 or 6 years, and from a pay perspective, my purchasing power was reduced after 4 or 5 years. I was earning less from a purchasing power perspective, even though I had 5 years of additional experience, which was silly, which was stupid. But I also remember my boss. Throughout the year, he would go on extravagant lunches. Whenever the boss from Melbourne was in Sydney, he'd be going out, they'd be spending up on wines and fine dining, and he'd come back to the office and he'd be gloating about it. He'd be boasting about how he went out to lunch with the boss and they spent X number of dollars on all these exotic wines. And I said to myself, that doesn't seem right. He comes back talking about how much money he's spending and how good a time he's having, and yet when it comes to pay review, he's spending more on lunch and turning it into an entertainment than what I'm getting in terms of a pay increase that I'm entitled to. I'm entitled to it because I've worked for it, I've contributed, I've added value, and yet, the pattern, the management pattern within the organisation was to skimp and to rip off its employees when it came to pay increases, and yet it wouldn't hold management accountable for the money that they were wasting on entertainment. Not talking about having meetings with other people, but just blowing it on themselves and justifying it internally through their own means. So once again, just a simple example, but we've got to learn that the only way to break the pattern is to call it out. and to cancel it. We're living in a world now of call-out culture and cancel culture, where people raise these issues, and these issues these days are potentially quite serious. But who's got the guts to raise this? Who's got the guts to call out their boss within a professional context, within a organisational environment, without the fear of being shafted and losing your job and having your reputation ruined within your industry? Because industry contacts or industry reputation is very, very important, and sometimes it's not worth risking losing that reputation, because if you lose your job within a particular industry, then it's very, very hard to get back into that industry, because you need references. And if the person who you need a reference from is your boss, who's doing the wrong thing that you've called out, then chances are you're not going to ever find a job back in that industry. But these days we've got social media, we've got the internet, which is really powerful when it comes to call-out culture and cancel culture, which is basically making significant impacts on how people operate, what people say, and what people do. And people are worried. I saw the professor, I've forgotten his name, but he's the key health officer for the nation, was too scared to define what a woman was, for fear of being cancelled, for fear of the implications of saying what he believed, and I guess what everybody else understands as being pretty standard. But once again, a lot of people are being gagged for fear of being called out. But let's get back to this book here. So the author here talks about the importance of focusing on the whole system rather than just parts of the system. We need to take a holistic approach to changing culture and look for the systematic issues that influence that culture. We need to change the whole system. It's not about just changing parts of the system, because everything within a system, within a culture, are inextricably intertwined. So you need to see it as a web, and you just can't change the threads. You have to change or look at changing the whole web in order to change the system. Because and that is very hard, because a system is often supported by other systems. They are entrenched, they are intertwined, they are self-regulating and self-supporting. So trying to change a culture, trying to improve a culture or bring about cultural change is quite challenging, because it's as we said, inextricably intertwined, and one supports the other, and it's really hard to be able to get a total picture and get your fingers on the whole parts of the system. So we need to change the web and not the threads. So in terms of how we change a culture, the author talks about, first of all, we need to diagnose and see what the problem is from a holistic perspective, from a systematic perspective. We need to try and reframe the roles, break the patterns and swap them out, and then consolidate and reinforce the gains. The other issue that I want to touch on here is within a corporate context, from a cultural perspective, is the issue of ageism. I want you to take a look around when you go back to your office, when you go to your organisation. I want you to take a look around and see how many people are in that organisation who still have a job, who are male and are 50 plus in their age. and are not in a management role. So senior professionals, 50 plus males. Well, what you'll find is that a lot of these people, a lot of these professionals who are leaders in their field, good at what they do, have been pushed out of their organisation because of the cultural impacts that are being pushed within organisations. There's a push for having younger teams, and there's no longer a place for anybody 50 plus. And every time a redundancy push comes along, the ones who are pushed out tend to be the older ones who may be earning a little bit more but are adding significantly more value. So something to think about, something to consider. And as we said, the bottom line and the most important lesson of all is you don't need to change things just to tick a box and to tick a KPI. You know, changing things without improving things is a waste of time and dysfunctional. So I guess that's the final point that I want to make on this Friday morning, this overcast Friday morning. Looks like the rain may hold off today, but it changes so quickly. As you can see on those from those flags on the harbour bridge, the wind is coming in from the east, from the ocean. So we'll see if that blows in cloud and rain, or if it blows in blue skies and better days. So take care, everybody, and I thank you for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club, where my YouTube channel grows by one video every single day without fail. And this one is 1,317. So spread the word, and hopefully we can all gain from these chit-chatters that we have on a daily basis. So yassas, all the best, happy Friday, and we'll chat again. Bye for now.